Okay, so now we are going to present, his name is Marvin Hilton, and his topic is exploring Mars to connect with ourselves and the universe. Okay, we give him a round of applause.
Don't look so surprised.
Pretty amazing.
It's a system. It's working.
Yeah. Well, good afternoon, fellow Earthlings. Are we humans alone in the universe? We don't know. The rocket scientist most responsible for leading the mission to land humans on the moon 49 years ago was Wernher von Braun. And he said, by going into outer space, we will find ourselves. And that is the key reason for having an international mission to send humans to Mars on a cooperative effort. And if we do that, it will create a situation where everybody will be aware that we are addressing these fundamental questions like, what is the human place in the universe? Are we humans alone in the universe? Who are we humans really? And that will create a global and local conversation and help improve life on this planet. And all humans could be inspired by the excitement and novelty of watching a crew representing all humanity step onto the red dust of our next door planet Mars and beginning to examine the soil, the ancient stream beds, the mountains and valleys for any signs of life, any kind of life. And in the end, it will create a better life on Earth. It will reduce some conflict that we have on the Earth, and we will be better connected with ourselves and the universe. Now, the astronaut Edgar Mitchell, who was on the moon for 9 hours, came back and said, seeing the Earth from space produced instant global consciousness. And I came back to Earth no longer an American citizen, but a planetary citizen. And several other astronauts have said basically the same thing, including one from Saudi Arabia. And that is one of the key reasons why we need to go ahead and look beyond the Earth and explore beyond the Earth. And the astronomer Jill Tarter said something closely related to that. She said that we are all Earthlings. We owe it to each other to celebrate our commonality rather than our perceived differences, and we need to pay attention to that. And the astrophysicist Jeffrey Bennett went a little bit further. He said, we can grow up and solve our problems only by exploring the universe beyond the Earth. In other words, we're not ever going to become a truly wise, mature civilization until we explore beyond the Earth more than we are already. And way back in 1964, the late Reverend Kenneth Patton was way ahead of his time. He wrote a book entitled A Religion for One World. And in that book he wrote, a universal religion for the entire world must be thoroughly naturalistic and scientific. I'm not sure I would call it a religion, but he did. Maybe you should say a belief system. And he also in that book wrote that science rests on a foundation of scrupulous moral principles the chief of which is an exacting honesty and objectivity. Our world could use some more of that. And back more recently in 2012, the Reverend Dr. Fraser Watts, a Cambridge professor of theology and science, said that science is the most genuinely international movement in the world order and therefore a force for peace and stability. And yes, science is at the root of much of our worldwide cooperation. And a good example of that is the Large Hadron Collider. It's located near Geneva, Switzerland, and supported by 60 different nations, including the United States. And they recently, a few years ago, announced that they found the fundamental particle of the universe, the Higgs boson particle, and that kind of information will allow all humanity to better understand how the universe actually works. And back in 2006, the NASA Research Center held a conference, and one of their major conclusions was that international cooperation is not only vital to sending humans to Mars, but one of the most important reasons for going in the first place. And I think we need to keep that in mind. And Jan Werner, the European Space Agency director, recently made the comment that our globe deserves cooperation beyond national vanity and beauty contests. And we Americans probably need to pay attention to that a little more. And most people are not aware that back in 1963, President Kennedy proposed sending representatives of all nations to the moon instead of having a race to the moon. But unfortunately, he was assassinated before he accomplished that. And I've talked to lots of people about a Humans to Mars mission. And one of the most common things I hear it over and over. They say, before we waste money on sending people to Mars, we need to solve problems here on Earth. I've heard that so many times. But the point I'm trying to make here is, if we send an international cooperative effort to Mars, it will help solve problems here on this planet, just like the moonshot did back in 1969. And also, one of my replies is, before we waste money on anti-human weaponry and trillion-dollar wars, let's cooperate a little more and reduce some of that expenditure for wars and use it to go to Mars. Now, we have some of our priorities in the wrong order, in my opinion. Take, for instance, Jim Bridenstine, the NASA administrator. He receives a salary of $185,100 per year. Well, that's not a bad salary. That's a pretty good salary. But compare that to Chad Morris, the Arkansas football coach, gets over $3.5 million a year. Well, that's nothing. Nick Saban, the Alabama football coach, gets over $11 million. Lots of college football coaches get multi-million-dollar salaries for coaching a game and what I consider an escapism. And the U.S. federal budget of 2016 gave NASA 0.49%, and the military received 16%, and I suspect that that will be higher for 2018 on the military side. And one of my heroes in this game is Dr. Laura Grego, who is a Union of Concerned Scientists, a senior scientist, and she is launching a campaign to curb outer space military. And I think that is a great idea. And in the meantime, We already have many examples of international cooperation in space. There are 15 nations participating on the International Space Station, and the Russians have been providing transportation for the astronauts to get up there for several years. And back in 2012, there was a simulated mission to Mars in Moscow with Russians, Chinese, Frenchmen, and a Colombian all participating in that. And at one point, and probably most people have forgotten this, at one point, the Russians asked the U.S. for a joint mission to Mars. But our U.S. Congress said no. I think that was a mistake. I think it'd be a great idea. And the Chinese have a cooperative agreement with the European Space Agency and the Russians. Now, I think an international mission to send humans to Mars on a cooperative basis would create a global conversation, but I also think it could create a local conversation, and we could use those conversations to promote a humans to Mars mission. And the reasoning behind that is pointed out in this book, Reclaiming Conversation, The Power of Talk in a Digital Age. It's a 2015 book by Sherry Turkle. And she cites a lot of scientific research that shows that there's been a tremendous drop in trust and empathy in our communities in the last 10 years or so. And that's due to the fact that our human brains are designed to be triggered for empathy and trust by face-to-face conversation with eye contact. And what most people attribute to that is that we are using things like cell phones and computers, lots of technology, instead of face-to-face conversation. And one indication of that is a recent report showed that there are 2.2 billion people using Facebook and 335 million people using Twitter. And that lately there have been lots of reports of things like hate, fake accounts, and online trolls getting into those medias. And Turkle recommends that we unplug a little more from our technologies such as cell phones and have more face-to-face conversations so that we can create more empathy and trust in our local communities and perhaps on a worldwide basis too. And also, we could use those conversations with strangers on the street to promote a humans to Mars mission. And I asked a couple of people on video, well, actually I asked several people, but I only have time to play 2 clips. The first one, I asked, why is face-to-face conversation important to you? And the first speaker here on the video is a counselor.
I think humans need each other. Humans need human contact, connection, support, understanding, compassion. I don't think we get that through electronic devices. I think it requires talking to each other, looking at each other, building relationships, and feeling understood. I don't think there's any other way to get around that need for human people.
Okay, I'm going to play another clip by a young lady. Same question.
I think that it's hard to establish an actual connection without face-to-face, like a real personal connection. I don't know, I guess that kind of sums it up for me. How do you see the person's emotions and feel their emotions? And yeah, so that's kind of...
And I asked several people that, and they all basically said the same thing. We need to talk more face-to-face with eye contact. And my next slide is about this woman. I think it's 5 or 6 years ago, I gave a version of this presentation, and afterwards as I was walking out the door, this woman followed me, and she was insisting that she knew that we humans are not alone in the universe. And she said she knew that because we have dogs. She was absolutely certain about it. But I think that we ought to talk at least as much to our fellow humans as we do to our best friends, the canines. And I've done that recently in what I call an at-random street survey. And I asked 286 people in 12 states. I just approached strangers on the street, and I would say, "Excuse me, can I ask you a quick question?" And then I would ask them if they thought that an international Humans to Mars cooperative effort would be a good idea. And only 8 people refused to answer that question. I thought that was pretty darn good. But 31.6 said no, definitely no. But 68.4% said yes, and that's equivalent to 190 people. But if you didn't want to ask that kind of question to strangers on the street, you could ask people to sign this petition from citizens of Earth to the leaders of planet Earth, and I have the petition here on the table, and you're very welcome to sign it. And I recorded several people answering this question: is it a cooperative international Humans to Mars mission a good idea? And I'll play some of those clips.
I think there could be some benefit in that. It depends on which countries we would coordinate with, but I don't think it's an America-only thing. I'm not an America First kind of gal, necessarily. So I could see where it could bring about world cooperation, and I like that idea of having different countries come together, pooling their resources and their knowledge, and I think it could be a good thing.
I think if no one else would do it, I think it would be good if we did it.
I think it would be a good idea for the U.S. to coordinate worldwide cooperation to go to Mars. In my mind, I can't conceive of it happening, but the very fact that if he could get everybody to work together would be awesome.
I think anytime we come together, it's a good idea. And I think this should happen right after we solve our problems right here at home.
Why not? That's what I think, is why not?
And those are very typical answers. A lot of people said, yeah, it's a good idea, but we got to solve problems here on Earth. But what I'm trying to make the point is, if we did send an international cooperative effort to send humans to Mars, it would help at least begin to solve problems here. Just like our lives were improved on the Earth with the moonshot. At least that's what I noticed. And I think there are local conversations about a Humans to Mars mission are becoming much more common. And a good indication of that is the fact that the tiny town of Lowell, Arkansas, last July the 20th, had something they called a Mars block party. Now, if you look at that picture, you will think they should have called it a Mars open field party. But there were over 150 people there, and they were all interested in a Humans to Mars mission. And something that amazed me, and I live close to these towns, another little town right next to Lowell had something called a Team Zophorus, and Rogers, Arkansas, won first place in this year's NASA contest to design a Martian habitat. I was shocked to see it in the local newspaper. So people are talking more about, even in the flyover state of Arkansas. They're talking about a Humans to Mars mission. So in the end, a cooperative international Humans to Mars mission can address these fundamental questions that we have, like, what is the human place in the universe? Are we humans alone in the universe? Who are we humans really? And I believe that will create a global and local conversation, and the local conversation even can be used to promote a Humans to Mars mission. And as I said before, life will be improved on the earth, and all humans can be inspired by watching a crew representing all humanity, watching it on their cell phones, their computers, and their television sets, watching that crew step on the red dust of our next door neighbor planet Mars and begin examining the soil, the ancient stream beds, the mountains and valleys for any signs of life. And in the end, it will reduce some conflict in our world, and it will create a better connection with ourselves and the universe. Any comments or questions? Yes.
Yeah, I've noticed that people generally don't feel like they're involved in a space mission, and so I've been looking for ways to try to show them that there are paths that they could take to follow their interest in space, because I think a lot of people just shut that off. And one of the things we're going to do is we're going to host a Yuri's Night.
Yuri Night?
Yuri's Night,
Yeah.
yeah, for the first time in our city. And what I'm trying to do is reach out to people like space researchers and people in space industries that are local, to kind of showcase to everybody that, you know, those jobs and those abilities are there. But I just wonder if we need something more for, you know, the public to feel directly involved in space, other than just watching. You know, like watching is gonna be fantastic, but you know, I'm searching for a way to do that. Any thoughts?
Well, the basic thought I have is teach people how that a mission to Mars can improve life on Earth, because that's their biggest objection. They say, we don't want to waste money on going to that planet out there. We have nothing to do with that. So first we want to fix problems here. Well, what we need to do is educate as many people as possible that such a mission will improve life on Earth. It will create jobs just like the Moon Project did. It will increase science education just like the Moon Project did, perhaps even more.
It's funny how we object to, or people generally object to a space program, but we'll spend more than 16 times on military.
Absolutely. Trillions and trillions of dollars to kill each other. Let's stop that, use the money, and then educate ourselves in a way, educate the whole human race. Yes.
Is this kind of like a Mars Day, and then you could put on social media, and then people in each of the cities, like yours, each of them could do their thing to do something on the Earth. That's, you know what I'm saying? Related to Mars, that they're getting them together. I don't know, just a thought.
Well, that's what they did in Lowell, Arkansas last July. Yes.
Mars Day. I don't know the date. I should know the date. But I saw it on CBS Sunday morning. There is a Mars Day. Oh, who knows about it?
That's what the internet's for, which we wouldn't have without the moon. So, yeah.
Yes.
Well, it was really extraordinary how many people turned out for the solar eclipse and traveled in.
Yes.
It certainly looked like the people were making incredibly positive associations with each other. And it kind of holds in with this as something that connected people looking out to something that was happening in the solar system.
Yes.
Yeah, that was cool. I went down to Alliance, Nebraska, for at Tarter. Instead of Stonehenge, they have a Tarter there.
Any other comments or questions?
Great presentation.
Okay, thank you.